600 years ago in New Zealand, an eagle would drop out of the trees at 80 kilometers an hour and carry off children. And that's the recent one. Go back 2 million years, and our oldest ancestors couldn't even walk down to a river for water without a 25-foot crocodile pulling them under. And I'm not guessing, we literally have a Homo habilis foot in a museum with the bite still on it. Over in Australia, a 7-foot kangaroo with hooves was stalking people through the bush. In America, a 12-foot bear was hitting 40 miles an hour at full charge. Our ancestors lived through all of it. And honestly, these are just 4 of the creatures we're about to talk about. Let's start with that crocodile, because it's one of the most disturbing facts in the entire human story. Around 1.84 million years ago, in what's now Tanzania, our oldest ancestors, these little 4-foot Homo habilis individuals, basically the very first members of the human family, were sharing a single watering hole with a monster. Scientists eventually dug up the bones of this thing. They studied the skull, the teeth, the size, and they realized this wasn't just any crocodile. It was a brand new species, a 25-foot freshwater crocodile with 2 prominent horn-like crests jutting up over its ears. And when they sat down to officially name it in 2010, they made a brutal choice. They called it Crocodilus anthropophagus, which translates word for word to human eater. That is the actual scientific name on the actual peer-reviewed paper. And here's why they named it that. When paleontologists were digging through the same layers of rock at Olduvai Gorge, the famous fossil site in Tanzania, they kept finding hominin bones with bite marks on them. Specifically, crocodile bite marks. The most famous example is a fossilized foot called specimen OH8 from a Homo habilis individual. The foot has been bitten clean at the heel. You can look at it. It's in a museum collection. These early humans had no choice. They needed water. So every single day, somebody in that group had to walk down to the same river or lake where this thing was waiting under the surface and just hope today wasn't their day. There's no spear that helps you here. No fire scares it. You're a 4-foot creature wading into the home of the largest predator your species had ever met. This was the biggest threat to early humans, a horned crocodile that we literally named man-eater because of what it did to our ancestors. And the worst part? This is just where the story starts. Because humans don't really stop being on the menu for the next 2 million years. We just slowly learn to fight back. Fast forward to about 300,000 years ago, and you've got modern humans, actual Homo sapiens, you and me, finally evolving in Africa. And for the first 230,000 years of our existence, we did basically nothing dramatic. We hunkered down on the African continent, sharpened sticks, figured out fire properly, and watched the world go by. Then around 70,000 years ago, a small wave of our ancestors finally walked out of Africa and into the rest of the planet. And this is where things get genuinely insane. But before they left, Africa had its own monsters. Pelarovis, the giant African buffalo. Picture a normal buffalo. Now imagine it weighed 2 tons, ran 35 miles an hour, was wrapped in solid muscle, and had horns that tip to tip on the biggest males could stretch close to 10 feet across. That's longer than a basketball hoop is tall, sticking sideways out of the head of an animal in a permanent bad mood about everything. And we know our ancestors hunted these things. We have cave paintings of them mid-fight, gored bodies on the ground, the works. So even before we left Africa, our species was already taking shots at animals roughly the size of a pickup truck. Then we walked out, and the world got stranger fast. And I mean right outside of Africa. Because the moment our ancestors pushed up into Eurasia, they walked into something called the Mammoth Steppe, which is exactly as cool as it sounds. This was a massive frozen grassland that stretched from Spain all the way to Alaska, and it was packed wall to wall with megafauna. The headliner, obviously, was the woolly mammoth. Now, you've got a mental picture of a mammoth already, but the real ones were genuinely impressive. The big males stood 11 feet tall at the shoulder, weighed up to 6 tons, and were wrapped in 2 layers of hair, a dense, oily undercoat for warmth, and a long, shaggy outer coat They could trail 2 or 3 feet down their flanks. Their tusks, up to 15 feet long in the older bulls, twisting and curling in this dramatic spiral. And here's the part nobody tells you. Mammoths did not die out at the end of the Ice Age, like the schoolbooks say. A small population held on, isolated on Rangel Island in the Arctic Ocean, all the way down to about 4,000 years ago. The Egyptians were already building pyramids, while a herd of woolly mammoths was still casually wandering around in the snow. Wild. Now, while the mammoth was the celebrity, it definitely wasn't alone. One of its weirdest neighbors was the woolly rhino, built like a regular rhino, but covered in this thick brown coat of fur. It carried 2 horns on its face, the front one absolutely massive, sometimes growing more than 3 feet long and curving forward like a giant boomerang. Cave paintings in France and Spain show woolly rhinos with stunning accuracy, which means our ancestors were watching these things closely enough to memorize their faces. Think about that. Some person stood there, in the snow, in front of a real living woolly rhino, close enough to study it, then went home and painted it on a wall by firelight. But the steppe wasn't all big shaggy plant eaters. Stalking the same ground was the cave lion, and this was no ordinary cat. Cave lions were about 10% bigger than today's African lions, with the largest males pushing 700 pounds. They had no mane, and DNA suggests they were sandy or tan in color. Cave paintings even show them hunting in groups, ambushing reindeer and young mammoths. So picture an early human walking across a frozen plain, watching their breath, and seeing a pride of giant lions melting out of the long grass on the horizon. That was just a regular Tuesday for these people. While all that was unfolding out in the open, plenty of equally weird creatures were holed up in the caves and mountains, which is exactly where our ancestors took shelter. So if anything was going to scare them at night, it was probably going to be in there waiting for them. Cave bear. Massive domed forehead, broad shoulders, weights pushing 1,500 pounds in the biggest males. Standing on its hind legs, it could clear 10 feet easily. The plot twist? Despite the size and the gnarly canines, cave bears were almost completely herbivorous. Their teeth show wear patterns from chewing tough plants, not flesh. So humans and cave bears didn't usually fight over food, they fought over real estate. The same warm, dry caves humans wanted for shelter were exactly where cave bears wanted to hibernate, and sharing a cave with a 1,500-pound bear is just not a workable arrangement. There's even evidence of Neanderthals deliberately moving into caves and arranging cave bear skulls in what look like ritual displays. Whether that was respect, fear, or trophy-taking, we'll probably never know. Step outside the caves, into the open forests of Ireland, Britain, Russia, and Siberia, and you'd run into something even stranger looking, the Megaloceros, also known as the Irish elk. Even though it wasn't really an elk and wasn't only Irish, this was a giant deer that stood 7 feet tall at the shoulder. But the part nobody believes when they see it is the antlers. Megaloceros antlers spread up to 12 feet wide, tip to tip, and weighed close to 90 pounds. Just to be clear, that's a single deer carrying around antlers wider than a king-sized bed on its head. Every single year, those antlers fell off and grew back from scratch, which means this animal was burning insane amounts of calcium and energy just to grow weapons it would drop and regrow annually. They survived in pockets of Eurasia until at least 7,700 years ago, easily long enough to be hunted, painted, and remembered by the humans who shared their world. Now, if you swing south and east, away from the icy Mammoth Steppe, and into the warmer forests of southern China and Southeast Asia, the fauna gets a whole different flavor of strange. And this is where we run into one of the most jaw-dropping creatures in the entire human story, Gigantopithecus blacki. Gigantopithecus was, hands down, the largest primate that has ever existed on planet Earth, period. Estimates from its enormous teeth and jawbones suggest males stood close to 10 feet tall and weighed somewhere around 500 to 600 pounds. Picture a gorilla. Now, make it half again as tall and roughly twice as heavy. Now, I know what you're thinking. Yes, this is the animal Bigfoot believers love to point to as the real Yeti. and I have to disappoint you. The latest research, a major nature study from 2024, dated their extinction to between 295,000 and 215,000 years ago in southern China. So they vanished just before our species, Homo sapiens, started showing up in the region. But Homo erectus, our older cousins who'd been in Asia for over 1 million years, definitely shared the landscape with these giant apes. They walked through forests where 10-foot apes were chewing through bamboo and figs in the canopy. And the reason these apes vanished is genuinely sad. As the climate dried out and forests became grasslands, Gigantopithecus, locked into a fruit-heavy diet, just couldn't adapt fast enough. Its smaller cousin, the orangutan, figured it out. Gigantopithecus didn't. And while these giant apes were quietly disappearing, our ancestors were also crossing paths with another monster of the Asian Pleistocene, Stegodon. The name sounds dinosaur-y, but Stegodon was actually an early elephant relative. And the biggest species was almost cartoonishly huge. Stegodon zadansky could push 13 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed up to 12.5 tons, heavier than the largest African elephant alive today. But here's the weird part. Their tusks were so close together that their trunks couldn't actually fit between them, so the trunk would just drape over the side, which sounds awkward and looks even weirder in the artist reconstructions. Stegodons trampled through forests and floodplains across China, India, and Indonesia. And on the Indonesian island of Flores, a smaller dwarfed version even ended up living alongside Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbit humans, 3-foot-tall people hunting 4-foot-tall elephants. Once you accept that scene actually happened, the rest of prehistory feels comparatively normal. When humans finally crossed into the Americas, somewhere between 20 and 15,000 years ago, depending on which scientist you ask, they walked into what was, at that exact moment, probably the strangest collection of large animals on Earth. And right at the top of the food chain was a creature you've definitely heard of, Smilodon fatalis, the saber-toothed cat. This is the iconic Ice Age predator. But the real animal is even weirder than the cartoon version. Smilodon was built nothing like a modern lion. It was shorter, much heavier, and essentially solid muscle. A big male weighed close to 600 pounds, with thick, stocky legs more like a bear's than a cat's, suggesting it ambushed prey rather than chased it down. And those famous fangs, which curved out of its mouth up to 11 inches long, they were actually pretty fragile. Smilodon couldn't bite down on bone the way a lion does. Instead, the current best theory is that it pinned huge prey, bison, juvenile mammoths, giant sloths with those massive forelimbs, then used its sabers like surgical knives to slice deep into the throat. Quick kill, no struggle, no broken teeth. And the unsettling part? We found Smilodon bones with healed injuries, meaning these animals lived in groups and cared for each other. So early Americans weren't just dealing with one giant cat, they were dealing with a coordinated pride of them. But Smilodon was just one face in the lineup. Lumbering through the same forests was Megatherium, the giant ground sloth, and this animal genuinely stretches the imagination. Megatherium was the size of a modern Asian elephant, 20 feet long from snout to tail, weighing up to 4 tons. Standing up on its hind legs, which it did all the time to reach high branches, it could touch leaves more than 17 feet off the ground. So picture an elephant-sized sloth, covered in coarse hair, with massive curved claws used to hook branches and probably to fend off saber-tooths. Some scientists even argue Megatherium occasionally ate meat, scavenging kills from other predators, a deeply unsettling image. And there's surprisingly strong evidence humans hunted them. One extraordinary set of human footprints in New Mexico, preserved for over 20,000 years, shows a person walking right alongside a giant sloth's tracks. Tracker and prey, captured in real time. Sharing the same plains was Glyptodon. And look, it's hard to describe Glyptodon without sounding like I'm making it up. Imagine an armadillo. Now make it the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. That's Glyptodon. Domed shell up to 10 feet long, a heavy bony tail that some species swung like a club, and a body weight of about a ton. Early humans definitely encountered them. There are even archaeological sites in South America where glyptodon shells appear to have been used as makeshift shelters by people. So your tent was the literal armor of an extinct giant armadillo. That's a sentence I never expected to write. Add in the American mastodon, a stockier, more forest-dwelling cousin of the mammoth that lumbered through eastern North America right up until about 10,500 years ago. We have mastodon bones with stone spear points still embedded in them. Undeniable proof humans hunted these things. And looming over all of it was the giant short-faced bear, the same bear we mentioned above. 12 feet tall on its hind legs, over a ton in weight, toes pointing straight forward like a sprinter's, so it could hit 40 miles an hour at a full charge. The first humans who walked into the Americas didn't just face one terrifying animal. They walked into an entire continent that was actively trying every single day in dozens of different forms to kill them. But of all the strange worlds early humans walked into, none was stranger than Australia. By the time people arrived there, around 65,000 years ago, the continent had been isolated for tens of millions of years, and evolution had taken some genuinely bizarre detours. The animals waiting for them weren't just unfamiliar. Most of them were unlike anything else alive on Earth. The most terrifying of all was Megalania, scientifically Varanus priscus, the largest land lizard that has ever lived. Picture a Komodo dragon, then triple it. Megalania could grow up to 18 feet long, possibly longer, and weighed somewhere between 700 and over 1,000 pounds depending on which estimate you trust. And recent research suggests it probably had a venomous bite, just like its close relative, the Komodo, which means a single chomp could send a human into shock and death even if they escaped the initial attack. The newest fossils of Megalania date to around 50,000 years ago, which is right when the first Aboriginal Australians showed up. There's no smoking gun that humans wiped them out, but the timing is suspicious enough that almost every scientist who studies it raises an eyebrow. But here's where Australia gets really weird. Sharing the bush with that monster was an animal that absolutely no one expects, a kangaroo, but not the kangaroos you're picturing. This was Crocodile Goliath, the giant short-faced kangaroo, and it broke every rule about how a kangaroo is supposed to look. Stood 7 feet tall, weighed over 500 pounds, 3 times heavier than the biggest red kangaroo alive today, and its feet had a single huge toe each, almost like a hoof. The thing didn't even hop properly. It was too heavy for the bouncy hopping kangaroos do today. So it walked, it shuffled. And here's the wild part. Aboriginal communities in New South Wales still tell stories, actual living oral tradition, of a giant, long-armed, aggressive kangaroo that would attack people. That's a memory passed down from mouth to mouth for tens of thousands of years, of an animal nobody alive today has ever seen. And the science backs it up. Crocodile and Aboriginal Australians overlapped on the continent for as long as 30,000 years. Then there was Diprotodon, and Diprotodon is what you'd get if a hippopotamus and a wombat had a baby, and that baby grew to roughly the size of a rhinoceros, the largest marsupial that ever lived, weighing up to 3 tons, with a wide flat head and giant grinding teeth. Diprotodons traveled in herds, leaving behind enormous trackways in old lake beds, and there's actual evidence of human predation on them. Cut marks on Diprotodon bones, butchering sites, the works. So early Aboriginal hunters were taking down rhino-sized marsupials, which, honestly, is a level of skill that does not get nearly enough credit. And finally there was Thylacoleo, the marsupial lion. This thing was extra weird because it didn't evolve from cats at all. It evolved from herbivorous, koala-like ancestors, and then turned into a stone-cold predator. Thylacoleo had the strongest bite force of any mammalian carnivore ever measured. Its incisors were modified into stabbing daggers, and it had retractable claws on its thumbs that worked like switchblades. About the size of a leopard, and it almost certainly hunted by ambushing prey from trees. Aboriginal rock art in northwestern Australia includes paintings that some researchers identify as Thylacoleo, with the right body shape, the right stripes, even the long tail. If those identifications hold, it means we have a literal portrait of this extinct predator drawn by the people who actually saw it. Okay, We've gone from Africa 2 million years ago all the way to Ice Age Australia. Now I want to bring you forward in time. Way forward. Because the last animal on this list, the eagle from the very beginning of the video, is the most recent one. So recent, in fact, that the people who saw it would have looked, sounded, and lived basically like you and me. When the first Polynesian sailors landed in New Zealand around the year 1280, they walked onto an island that had no land mammals. None. No tigers, bears, and wolves. Birds had taken over every single role those mammals would normally fill. And one of those birds had decided it was going to be the apex predator. This was Haast's eagle, scientifically Hieratus murray. And it was, by a wide margin, the largest eagle ever to fly on planet Earth. Adult females weighed up to 40 pounds, with a 10-foot wingspan. Their talons grew up to 4 inches long, comparable in size to a tiger's claws. Their primary prey was the moa, a flightless bird that stood 12 feet tall and weighed up to 500 pounds. So Haast's eagle was hunting prey 15 times its own body weight. And the way it did this was nightmarish. It would perch in a high tree, then dive down at 80 kilometers an hour and slam into the moa's hindquarters with such force that it could shatter the moa's pelvis on impact. Then it would deliver a killing blow to the skull. Studies of the skeleton suggest it didn't just kill the moa, it ate it from the inside out, vulture style. Now here's the part that gets people. When the Maori arrived, the moa started disappearing, hunted out within about 200 years, which left Haast's eagle in a tough spot. Its main food source was gone, and the only animals left that were anywhere close to moa-sized? People. Maori oral tradition specifically remembers a giant bird called the pouakai, described as snatching people, including children, from villages. Researchers studying the bird's anatomy have confirmed it could absolutely have killed an adult human, let alone a child. So that's not just legend, that's a memory. The eagle went extinct around the year 1400, barely 600 years ago. There are people alive today whose great-great-grandparents knew people whose great-great-grandparents may have lost a family member to one. And here's the part nobody really likes to talk about. By the end of the Pleistocene, about 10,000 years ago, and then again with Haast's eagle just 600 years ago, the vast majority of these incredible animals were gone within a window of just a few thousand years. And while climate change played a real role, it's getting harder and harder to ignore one specific pattern. Almost everywhere humans showed up, the giants disappeared shortly after. Africa, where animals had millions of years to learn that humans are dangerous, kept most of its megafauna. Every other continent got us cold. Most of them didn't survive the introduction. Heavy thought. But it's also the reason a video like this even exists. We are the only species walking around today that actually shared a planet with woolly mammoths and saber-toothed cats and 10-foot kangaroos and human hunting eagles. That memory lives in our bones. So next time you walk past an elephant, a tiger, a rhino, take a long look. Because somewhere, deep in our species' past, our ancestors stared down much, much stranger things and lived to tell the story. If you made it this far, drop a comment and tell me which one of these animals you'd least want to run into in real life. And if you liked this video, hit subscribe. There's a lot weirder stuff coming.